A single Disney film, The Lion King, has generated over $10 billion in total revenue, but the movie itself is responsible for less than 5% of that. The other 95% came from something most people never think about: a machine built to extract value from a single story across every format, every platform, and every generation. That is not a coincidence. That is architecture. And today, we are breaking down exactly how Disney built it and why it may be the most sophisticated money system ever assembled in the history of entertainment. We are living through a fundamental transformation in how intellectual property creates wealth. For most of the 20th century, a film studio made a film, released it in theaters, collected ticket revenue, and moved on. The model was linear. You produced, you sold, and the relationship ended there. That model no longer dominates the industry, and Disney was one of the first companies to understand why. What has changed is the architecture of attention. In a world where streaming platforms compete for hours, where theme parks compete for annual family budgets, and where merchandise lines compete for shelf space in every retail store on Earth, the companies that win are not the ones with the best single product. They are the ones with the best system for extracting value from a single idea across every possible surface. In 2026, this principle is more powerful than ever. Content has become infrastructure. A story is no longer a product, it is a platform. And the companies that understand this are not just in the entertainment business, they are in the business of building recurring, compounding revenue from a single creative asset. Disney understood this before most people had a vocabulary for it. When the company acquired Pixar in 2006, Marvel in 2009, Lucasfilm in 2012, and 21st Century Fox in 2019, it was not acquiring film studios. It was acquiring universes, self-contained story systems with characters, mythology, and emotional loyalty that could be monetized across every format simultaneously. The scale of what that strategy has produced is difficult to overstate. The Marvel Cinematic Universe alone has generated over $30 billion in box office revenue globally. But box office is, again, only the beginning. When you add merchandise, theme park attractions, streaming content, video games, and licensing deals, that number grows by a multiple that most traditional industries cannot comprehend. This is the new shape of wealth creation at the top of the entertainment economy. And Disney did not stumble into it. They designed it deliberately over decades. To understand how Disney's model actually works, you need to understand a concept that the company rarely discusses publicly, but executes with extraordinary precision: the franchise flywheel. Here is the basic structure. Disney invests heavily in a single creative property: a film, a character, a story universe. That initial investment is the most expensive and most risky part of the entire system. But if the property connects with audiences, it does not just generate ticket revenue, it generates an asset. That asset then spins across what Disney internally refers to as its business segments, but what is more accurately described as a series of revenue conversion points. A child watches a film and forms an emotional attachment to a character. That attachment creates demand for a physical toy. The toy sale funds the next production. The character appears in a theme park, which generates ticket revenue, hotel revenue, and food and beverage revenue that dwarf the original film's box office performance. A streaming platform then distributes spin-off content, creating subscription revenue and extending the emotional bond into the next generation. Each of these is not just an independent revenue stream. Each one reinforces the others. The park visit makes the child watch the film again. The streaming series creates demand for new merchandise. The merchandise drives awareness for the theme park. The entire system is self-reinforcing, and that is the architectural genius at the center of Disney's wealth model. Now here is the detail that most people overlook. And it is where the real financial leverage lives. Disney does not own just the stories. It owns the distribution infrastructure for the stories. It owns the theme parks. It owns the streaming platform. It owns the retail licensing relationships. It owns the Broadway production infrastructure. It owns ABC, ESPN, and a portfolio of linear broadcast assets that, while declining, still generate billions in affiliate fees annually. What this means is that Disney does not need to pay a third party to distribute its assets. It distributes them through itself. Every layer of the flywheel captures margin that would otherwise leave the company. That vertical integration is the moat, and it took decades and tens of billions of dollars in capital to build. But here is what is counterintuitive about Disney's financial structure, and this is the part that even experienced business observers miss. The theme parks, not the films, are the engine. In 2023, Disney's parks, experiences and products segment generated over $32 billion in revenue. The entire entertainment segment, which includes all theatrical releases, streaming, and television, generated less. For a company whose identity is synonymous with storytelling and cinema, the physical real-world experience. Business is larger than the content business. Think about what that means. The movie is essentially a marketing event for the park. The park is where the margin lives, and the park's value is entirely dependent on the story that the film created. Disney is not, at its core, a movie company. It is a land developer, a hospitality operator, and a consumer goods licensing business, all of which are powered by an emotional engine that happens to be expressed through cinema. Understanding why most people, and most companies, never build systems like this requires a clear-eyed look at how people think about value creation. The average approach to earning money is transactional. You produce something, you sell it, the transaction ends. You produce again, sell again. This is not a flawed approach, it is how most of the economy operates, but it has a fundamental limitation. Your income is always proportional to your current output. You stop producing, you stop earning. The Disney model operates on a completely different psychological and structural logic. It treats every creative investment not as a transaction, but as an asset, something that generates returns after the initial production is complete across multiple channels indefinitely. This distinction is not about intelligence. It is not about access to resources, at least not initially. It is about the mental model you apply to your own work. Behavioral economists have long documented what they call the labor illusion, the tendency to overvalue the effort that goes into producing something and undervalue the infrastructure that distributes it. Most creators focus obsessively on the quality of what they make and spend almost no time thinking about the system through which it travels. Disney does the opposite. The storytelling is the fuel. The infrastructure is the engine. The people who have built the most durable wealth in the modern economy, whether at the scale of a global media conglomerate or a single creator with a digital audience, share one cognitive trait. They think about their work as the beginning of a system, not the end of an effort. They ask, once this exists, how many ways can it create value? What formats can it inhabit? What audiences has it not yet reached? What adjacent products does it make possible? That is not ambition, that is architecture. And it is a skill that can be developed regardless of the scale at which you operate. To see this in practice, consider the trajectory of Frozen. Released in 2013, Frozen was a successful animated film. Its opening weekend gross was impressive, but the film's theatrical performance, while strong, was not unprecedented in the animated genre. By conventional metrics, it was a hit. By Disney's metrics, it was something far more significant, the beginning of an asset cycle. Within 18 months of the film's release, Frozen merchandise had generated over $5 billion in retail sales. The character Elsa became the best-selling Disney doll in history. The film's soundtrack, led by Let It Go, became one of the most commercially successful animated film soundtracks ever recorded, generating streaming and download revenue that continued compounding years after the theatrical release. Disney then deployed the full Flywheel. Frozen attractions appeared in theme parks globally. A Broadway production was developed, extending the story's reach into an entirely different demographic. A sequel was greenlit, which reset the entire cycle. And Disney Plus launched with Frozen content as a cornerstone of its animated library, driving subscription acquisition. The cumulative value of the Frozen franchise is estimated to exceed $10 billion, from a film that cost roughly $150 million to produce. That is a return ratio that has no equivalent in most traditional industries. But here is what almost derailed the entire Frozen strategy. And this detail is rarely discussed. In early production, Frozen was not performing well in internal screenings. The story structure was unclear. The character of Elsa was inconsistent. And there was genuine concern within Disney Animation that the film would not connect with audiences. The production went through significant restructuring in its final 18 months, including the fundamental repositioning of Elsa from villain to a more complex, sympathetic figure. If the creative product had failed, the Flywheel would have produced nothing. This is the tension inside Disney's model that the company does not advertise. The entire infrastructure, the parks, the merchandise, the streaming investment, is dependent on the creative product generating genuine emotional connection. When it does, the Flywheel is extraordinary. When it does not, the same infrastructure that amplifies success amplifies failure. Disney has had both experiences. The theatrical disappointments of the early 2000s were not just box office misses. They were Flywheel failures that cost the company across every segment, which is precisely why the acquisition of Pixar, Marvel, and Lucasfilm was not just content diversification, it was risk management. Now you are not building a theme park. You are probably not acquiring a billion-dollar intellectual property portfolio. But the structural principle behind Disney's model applies at any scale, and understanding it could change how you think about every professional or creative asset you build. The question to ask yourself is this: does the work you produce today have a second life? A third life? Consider a professional in financial services who writes an article explaining how compound interest works. In the transactional model, that article is read once, generates some visibility, and expires. In the Flywheel model, that article becomes a YouTube script, which becomes a short-form video, which generates a following, which creates demand for a course, which funds a newsletter, which leads to consulting inquiries. The original intellectual work, produced once, moves through multiple formats, reaching new audiences at each stage. This is not a new idea. It is the oldest principle in intellectual property economics. But most people never apply it to their own work because they have been trained to think about output rather than assets. The practical shift starts with one question. Before you produce anything, a piece of writing, a video, a service, a product, ask, in how many formats could this exist? If the answer is 1, you are leaving value on the table. If the answer is 4 or 5, you are beginning to think like a system architect rather than a transactional producer. You do not need Disney's infrastructure to apply Disney's logic. You need Disney's mindset, the one that sees every creative investment as the beginning of a compounding cycle, not the completion of a task. There is a concept in business strategy called bottleneck control, the practice of owning or controlling the point in a system where value must flow through to reach its destination. Disney's real competitive advantage is not its stories. Stories can be copied, approximated, and replaced. Its real advantage is that it controls the bottlenecks through which its stories must travel to reach their audience. It owns the parks, the only place where you can physically inhabit a Disney universe. It owns the streaming platform, the primary distribution channel for its content in the digital age. It owns the licensing relationships, the agreements that determine which retailers can sell official Disney merchandise and at what margin. It owns the theatrical relationships, the negotiating leverage that comes from being one of the few studios whose films are guaranteed to fill seats. Each of these is a bottleneck, and controlling bottlenecks means that every competitor who wants access to your audience must come to you, not the other way around. This principle is not unique to entertainment. Amazon controls the bottleneck between hundreds of millions of consumers and the independent sellers who need to reach them. Apple controls the bottleneck between app developers and iPhone users. Google controls the bottleneck between the open internet and the people searching for information within it. The companies generating the most durable, compounding wealth in the modern economy are not primarily in the business of producing things. They are in the business of owning the infrastructure through which things must pass. And here is the uncomfortable implication of that insight. If you are a creator, a professional, or a small business owner who does not own any distribution infrastructure, who relies entirely on platforms, algorithms, and third-party marketplaces to reach your audience, you are not in the Disney position. You are in the position of the independent filmmaker whose film needs Disney's distribution to reach theaters. You are dependent on someone else's bottleneck. That is not a permanent condition, but it requires acknowledging it clearly, because most people in that position spend their energy trying to produce better content rather than thinking about how to build or acquire distribution that they control. Your email list is a distribution asset you own. Your direct customer relationships are distribution assets you own. Your reputation in a specific professional community is a distribution asset you own. The question is whether you are building those with the same intentionality that Disney brought to building its parks and its streaming platform. Because the gap between the people generating transactional income and the people generating compounding system-driven wealth is almost never a gap in talent. It is almost always a gap in ownership. Disney did not become the most valuable entertainment company in history because it made the best films. It became the most valuable entertainment company in history because it understood that a story is not a product. It is an asset that can be engineered to generate returns across every dimension of human experience, from childhood imagination to adult nostalgia, from a screen in your living room to a park you will spend $3,000 to visit. The mechanism is not magic. It is architecture. And architecture can be studied, understood, and applied, whether you are managing a billion-dollar franchise or building the early stages of something that does not yet have a name. The most important shift is not in what you produce. It is in how you think about what you produce after it exists. Next week, we go deeper into the mechanics of that shift and the specific model that has quietly made more self-made wealth over the past decade than almost any other structure in the modern economy. It is hiding in plain sight, and most people walk past it every day without recognizing what they are looking at. Subscribe to Business and Money Secrets, and come back tomorrow. What we're covering next will make today's episode look like the introduction.